I used to be someone who thought love was enough, until the morning I destroyed everything with 6 cruel words. My husband David asked for a simple hug before work, and I snapped, "You're not a kid, grow up," then slammed the door in his face. What I didn't know was that he had just lost his job the day before and was trying to tell me his mother had cancer. For weeks, I had been too busy climbing the corporate ladder and flirting with my coworker Andrew to notice my husband's pain. While I was mocking David to Andrew as needy and childish, my husband was silently carrying burdens I couldn't be bothered to see. By the time I realized what I had done, he had already found someone who actually cared enough to listen. This is the story of how my cruel rejection of a hug revealed the selfish person I had become. I used to think love was enough. I used to think David and I were different from other couples, that we would never become those people who barely acknowledge each other across the dinner table. But here we are. Sometimes I don't even recognize the woman I've become. My name is Vespera Lockhart, though most people call me Vess. I'm 35, and this is the story of how I destroyed my marriage by being too important for a simple hug. I sit alone in our half-empty apartment, divorce papers spread across the coffee table where David's books used to be. The silence feels oppressive now, though I once craved it. Funny how you don't notice the warmth of something until it's gone. Like a hug you were too busy to accept. 8 years ago, David and I met when we both had nothing but ambition and a tiny apartment we could barely afford. I was hustling to make my way up in the corporate world while he was building his reputation as a project manager. We were a team back then, or at least that's what I told myself. Looking back, maybe I was already seeing him as the supporting character in my story rather than us writing it together. David used to look at me like I was his entire world. He would surprise me with coffee in bed on Sundays, even though I was often checking emails before my eyes fully opened. He would listen to my work complaints with genuine interest, offering solutions or simply understanding when that's what I needed. When did I stop doing the same for him? Everything changed when I got that promotion last year. Suddenly, I was managing major accounts, getting invited to executive dinners, and finally becoming somebody at the company. David congratulated me with champagne and took me out to celebrate, but I could sense something in his eyes. Was it pride? Or was it fear that I was leaving him behind? Either way, I didn't have time to worry about his feelings. I had finally arrived. Andrew started at the company around the same time as my promotion. He quickly became my work confidant, someone who actually understood the pressure I was under, unlike David, who just ran his little projects and came home at 5:30 every day. Andrew and I would stay late strategizing, and I found myself looking forward to our conversations more than going home. "The Henderson account is perfect for your aggressive style," Andrew would say, leaning against my desk after hours, his suit jacket discarded, sleeves rolled up. "You've got the killer instinct none of these other account managers have." I didn't realize I was slowly chipping away at David's confidence, one backhanded compliment at a time. "You're too nice, that's your problem," I'd tell him over a dinner he'd prepared while I was working late. I was cutting him down to make my own rise seem more impressive. I couldn't understand why David couldn't just be happy for me. Why did he need so much reassurance? Andrew certainly understood. He'd listen to me vent about David's neediness and nod sympathetically. "Sounds like he's threatened by your success," he'd say, and I'd feel validated. Meanwhile, I was conveniently forgetting dinner with David's parents but remembering every single work happy hour. I'd promised to visit his mother Diana but canceled last minute because of emergencies at work. She never said anything directly, but I could feel her watching me with those knowing eyes whenever we were in the same room. I'd laugh it off, tell David later his mom was old-fashioned and didn't understand modern careers. What I didn't know then was that my own parents had written this exact script decades earlier. My father always working, always too important for family dinners or school plays. My mother constantly seeking his validation and growing more bitter by the year. I swore I'd never become either of them. Yet somehow I'd become the worst of both, demanding recognition while withholding affection. While I was climbing the corporate ladder and collecting validation from Andrew, David was quietly carrying burdens I didn't bother to ask about. Our marriage was crumbling, and I was too busy checking my email to notice the rubble falling around us. The morning it all fell apart started like any other. I woke up before my alarm, immediately reaching for my phone to check overnight emails. David was already in the kitchen. I could smell coffee and something cooking. Irritating, really. His morning cheerfulness always felt like a passive-aggressive commentary on my stress levels. David had made breakfast, eggs, avocado toast, the works. Thought we could use a few minutes together, he said, sliding a plate toward me. Feel like I've barely seen you this week. I checked my watch. I have a presentation at 9:00, David. I don't have time for whatever this is. I grabbed a piece of toast and my coffee mug, moving toward my home office. Vas, wait, he said, and something in his voice made me pause. Can we talk just for a minute? I sighed dramatically. About what? I've been trying to tell you something for days, but you've been so busy, he said, and I noticed how tired he looked. It's about my mom. The doctors found my phone buzzed. Andrew with a question about the presentation. Sorry, I need to take this, I said, already turning away. Can it wait until tonight? David stared at me for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Sure, tonight. When I finally emerged dressed and ready for battle, he was by the door putting on his jacket. I'm heading out, he said, his voice oddly formal. Good luck with your presentation. I was checking a last-minute email, half listening. Thanks, don't wait up tonight, probably doing dinner with the team after. He stood there a moment too long, and I finally looked up, irritated by his hovering. Vess, he said quietly, could I get a hug before I go? I stared at him, genuinely confused. A hug now, when I was clearly in a rush, something about the neediness of it, the childishness of asking for affection when I was obviously busy, hit a nerve I didn't know was exposed. Are you serious right now? I snapped. You're not a kid, David, grow up. I moved past him, grabbing my bag. I don't have time for this. I opened the door and gestured for him to leave, then slammed it behind us both. In the elevator, we stood in silence. I was already mentally rehearsing my presentation, completely missing the way David seemed to shrink into himself, how he stared straight ahead as if seeing something far beyond the elevator doors. We parted in the lobby without a word. As I drove to work, I texted Andrew one-handed. You won't believe what just happened. David asked for a hug this morning like a freaking kindergartner while I'm trying to get to my presentation. Andrew responded immediately. Yikes, manchild alert. Want me to review your slides one more time before the meeting? I smiled, feeling validated. This was what understanding looked like. This was the kind of support I deserved. The presentation was a hit. Afterward, I found Andrew by the coffee machine, and the conspiratorial smile he gave me felt like a secret handshake. Your husband still sulking over that hug? He asked, low enough that others couldn't hear. I rolled my eyes, enjoying having someone who got it. God, you should have seen him. Like I have time to coddle his feelings before the biggest presentation of the quarter. Men can be so emotionally needy, Andrew agreed. Some people just can't handle being with a powerful woman. That afternoon, I detailed the morning's events to Andrew over lunch, embellishing slightly. In my version, David had practically begged for attention, whining about how I never made time for him anymore. What I didn't know was that David had received the final confirmation of layoffs at his company the day before. What I didn't know was that his mother Diana's routine checkup had revealed cancer that had already spread to her lymph nodes. When he asked for that hug, it wasn't neediness. It was a drowning man reaching for a lifeline. For the next 2 weeks, I barely noticed how little we spoke. David left for work before I woke up and was often asleep, or pretending to be, when I came home. On weekends, he mentioned visiting his mother, but I was too preoccupied to ask for details. When I bothered to notice his absence, I told myself it was a relief not to deal with his neediness. At work, Andrew became increasingly attentive, finding reasons for us to collaborate on projects and suggesting late meetings that inevitably turned into dinner or drinks. I told myself this was networking, career advancement. Certainly not the emotional affair it was rapidly becoming. It's like David doesn't even see how important my work is. I complained to Andrew one evening over martinis. He acts like I should drop everything because his mom has some health scare. Andrew nodded sympathetically, though something flickered in his eyes. What exactly is wrong with his mom? I paused, realizing I didn't actually know. Some tests or something, I said vaguely. He tried to tell me but picked literally the worst time. The truth was that David had stopped trying to tell me anything. The man who once shared every thought with me now moved through our apartment like a ghost, taking care not to disturb me. And the most disturbing part, I preferred it this way. My sister Camille's surprise visit 3 weeks after the hug incident was the first crack in my self-delusion. She showed up on a Saturday when David was supposedly at his mother's. "Where's David?" she asked after greeting me. "At his mom's again." I rolled my eyes. "He's been there every weekend lately. You'd think she was dying or something." Camille gave me an odd look. "Is she sick?" I shrugged. "Some health thing," he tried to tell me, but I was in the middle of prep for a massive presentation. Camille followed me to the kitchen. "So you don't know what's wrong with your mother-in-law?" "I've been swamped at work, Cam, major accounts, executive track potential." She studied me with uncomfortable intensity. "The David I know would never keep something important from you unless he felt he couldn't tell you." Before I could respond, David walked in. He stopped short, seeing Camille, but his surprise quickly transformed into genuine warmth as he hugged her. "Camille, this is a nice surprise." The hug lasted a beat longer than normal, and I felt an unexpected pang watching them. "How are you?" she asked, her tone suggesting a deeper question than casual greeting. "Managing," he said with a tired smile. That's when his phone rang. David checked the screen and his expression changed, a flash of worry before he composed himself. "Excuse me, I need to take this." He stepped into our bedroom, closing the door. When he emerged a few minutes later, his face was carefully neutral, but I could see tension in his jaw. "Everything okay?" Camille asked. "Just mom's doctor," he said, not looking at me. "They're adjusting her treatment schedule." "Treatment for what?" Camille asked, the question I should have asked weeks ago. David's eyes flickered to me before answering. "The breast cancer. They found it 6 weeks ago, but it's already in her lymph nodes." He paused. "Stage 3. I felt like I'd been slapped. 6 weeks ago, that was before the hug morning. "David, I started, but he was already gathering his keys and wallet. "I should get back to the hospital. They're doing another round of tests today." "David, wait. How are you holding up with all this?" Camille glanced at me. "And with everything else," he gave her a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I'm taking it one day at a time, focusing on what matters." Again, his eyes deliberately avoided mine. "Olivia next door has been amazing," he continued. "She's been helping coordinate mom's care team since she knows the hospital system." "Olivia?" I blurted. "Who's Olivia?" "Our neighbor from 4B, David said flatly. "She's been bringing dinner for mom and me at the hospital most nights." With that, he left, the door closing quietly behind him. Camille turned to me, eyes wide. "Vess, what the hell is going on? His mother has cancer, he's spending evenings with some neighbor, and you don't know any of this." I sank onto a bar stool, genuinely stunned. "I've been busy with work. He never said it was cancer." "Did you ever give him the chance to tell you?" I thought back to that morning, him trying to talk about his mother, me brushing him off for a text from Andrew. "There's something else," Camille said carefully. "When I hugged him, Vess, he felt different, like he's lost weight. And did you see how tired he looks?" I hadn't. I genuinely hadn't noticed anything about my own husband in weeks. "What happened between you two?" she asked. I thought about telling her some sanitized version of events, but suddenly the truth came pouring out. The hug, the door slamming, my cruel words. "You know what that reminds me of?" she finally said. "Dad. Remember how he'd make mom feel small whenever she needed anything from him?" The comparison felt like a physical blow. All my life, I'd sworn I'd never become our emotionally unavailable father. Yet here I was, treating David exactly as Dad had treated Mom. After Camille left for her hotel, I sat alone in our apartment, really seeing it for the first time in months. David's presence had been fading gradually. His books no longer on the coffee table. His favorite mug missing from the dish rack. Subtle signs of withdrawal I'd been too self-absorbed to notice. I opened our shared home office, looking for clues to the life I'd been ignoring. His desk was tidied as if he barely used it anymore. On impulse, I checked our filing cabinet and found medical documents. Deanna's cancer diagnosis from 6 weeks earlier, treatment plans, prognosis notes, and insurance forms with alarming numbers. Beneath those was another folder labeled simply Work. Inside was a formal layoff notice dated the day before the hug incident, along with unemployment application paperwork. And this surprised me. Several freelance contracts dated within the past 2 weeks. My husband had lost his job, his mother was dying, and he had been rebuilding his career alone while I had been mocking him to Andrew for being emotionally needy. The apartment door opened, startling me. David stood there looking even more exhausted than before. "What are you doing?" he asked, seeing the papers spread around me. "Why didn't you tell me?" I demanded, which was perhaps the worst possible response. "About your job, about your mom, any of it." Something shifted in his expression, not anger, which I could have handled, but a calm detachment that frightened me. "I tried," he said simply. "That morning, the one where you told me to grow up, I was going to tell you everything. My layoff, mom's diagnosis, all of it. But you were too busy, remember?" "You could have tried again," I argued weakly. "I did, for years, Vess. Every time I needed you, you had something more important. Every time I shared a concern, you dismissed it. Every time I reached out." He trailed off, shaking his head. "That morning wasn't the beginning, it was the end. It was me finally accepting what you've been showing me for years, that I don't matter to you." "That's not true," I protested. "Then where is my mother being treated?" he asked quietly. I opened my mouth, then closed it. "What stage is her cancer?" "Stage 3, I said, grasping at the one detail I'd learned. "And what's her oncologist's name?" Silence. "Who's been covering her medical expenses?" More silence. "These aren't trick questions, Vess. They're the basic details of my life for the past 6 weeks. His calm was devastating. I would have preferred yelling, anything but this detached recitation of my failures. "The hug," I said desperately. "You're overreacting to one bad morning when I was stressed." "It was never about the hug," he interrupted, his voice still terrifyingly calm. "The hug was just the moment I finally accepted what I'd been denying for years. You don't want a partner, you want an audience." "That's not fair," I said, feeling tears threatening. "Isn't it? When was the last time you asked about my day and actually listened to the answer? When was the last time you remembered something important to me? When was the last time you chose me over work? Even once?" Each question landed like a physical blow because I knew the answer to all of them. I couldn't remember. His quiet certainty terrified me more than any argument could have. I'd always been the one in control, the one who decided the terms of our relationship. Now David was walking away with a clarity I didn't possess, and it shook me to my core. "You can't just leave," I said, hating how childish I sounded. "I already have," he replied simply. "Emotionally anyway. I've been leaving for months while you were too busy with Andrew to notice." The mention of Andrew stung. "He's a colleague," I said automatically. "He's whatever you need him to be," David said, and the sad understanding in his voice was worse than accusation. As he gathered some clothes and toiletries, I followed him around the apartment, alternating between anger and pleading. His calm remained unshaken, which only fueled my growing panic. "This isn't fair," I insisted. "You're making a massive decision based on one bad morning." "No, I'm making it based on hundreds of bad mornings, missed dinners, forgot anniversaries, and dismissive comments. The hug was just the final data point." A week passed with no word from David beyond practical texts about bills and mail. Andrew continued to be mysteriously unavailable, always with a work excuse that I now recognized as the brush-offs they were. When I finally confronted him in person at the office, his response was revealing. "Look, Vess, I enjoy our work conversations, but I'm not getting involved in your personal drama." "That's not what this is," I said, confused. "What is this exactly?" he asked, suddenly looking uncomfortable. "We're colleagues, work friends," he said carefully. "I'm not your therapist or your divorce counsel." All those lunches, happy hours, late-night text sessions, they meant nothing to him beyond office entertainment. I'd been sharing intimate details of my marriage, seeking his validation, while to him I was just another work acquaintance. I spent that weekend alone in our apartment, really thinking about what Camille and David had said. I scrolled through photos from early in our marriage, David and me laughing on hiking trips, cooking together, looking at each other with genuine love. When had I stopped seeing him? When had his feelings become inconvenient intrusions rather than the foundations of our partnership? On Monday, I did something I hadn't done in years. I took a day off work without a specific reason. I drove to Diana's house, rehearsing what I would say to David, but when I arrived, only Diana was there, looking frailer than I remembered, but with the same sharp eyes that had always seemed to see right through me. Vespera, she said, neither welcoming nor dismissive. David's not here. Could I wait for him? I asked. She studied me for a long moment. He's with Olivia at a consultation with my new specialist. They'll be gone most of the day. Olivia, I repeated, feeling a stab of jealousy. They seem close. She's been a godsend, Diana confirmed. She drives me to appointments when David has work commitments, brings dinner most nights, knows all my medications. She paused meaningfully. She sees him, Vespera, really sees him. The implication was clear, unlike me. I want to fix things, I said, adding how small my voice sounded. Diana sighed. Some things can't be fixed. Some broken trust can't be restored. I made mistakes, I admitted. Big ones, but 8 years of marriage has to count for something. It counted for everything to David, she said quietly. That's why he tried so hard for so long. That's why he kept hoping you'd see him again. And now, I couldn't keep the fear from my voice. Now he's learning to build a life where he doesn't need to beg for basic kindness. When I finally left, she called after me. Vespera. I turned back. He did love you, completely. I hope you find someone you love that much someday. Her use of the past tense, did love you, followed me all the way home. The final conversation happened 2 weeks later. David asked to meet at a neutral coffee shop to discuss practical matters. I spent hours preparing what I would say, how I would make him see that I could change. But when he walked in, I knew immediately. The man sitting across from me wasn't the husband who had asked for a hug that morning. He was someone new, calmer, more centered, with a quiet confidence I'd never seen before. I think we should file for divorce, he said after we'd exchanged awkward greetings. I've drawn up a fair division of assets. You can have the apartment. No preamble, no drama, just a simple statement of fact that left no room for negotiation. Just like that, I said, struggling to keep my voice even. You're throwing away 8 years without even trying to fix things. I did try, he said gently. For years, Vespera, every dinner I made that you missed, every conversation you cut short, every time I reached out and you pulled away, those were all me trying. One bad morning, I started. It was never about the hug, he interrupted. How many times do I need to say that? The hug was just the moment I finally accepted what I'd been denying. You checked out of this marriage long before I did. That's not fair, I protested, but the words sounded hollow even to me. Isn't it? Tell me, what's my mother's oncologist's name? I stared at him, unable to answer. Dr. Melissa Chen, he supplied. She's been treating Mom for almost 2 months now. What company am I freelancing for? I had no answer. Robertson Design. I've mentioned it at least 3 times in texts about scheduling. What medication did I start taking 6 weeks ago? My confusion must have shown on my face. Antidepressants, he said quietly. I've been in therapy since before the hug incident. For depression caused by years of emotional neglect. Each fact landed like a physical blow, not because they were meant to hurt me, but because they revealed how completely I had failed to see the person I had promised to love. I didn't know, I whispered. You didn't ask, he replied, not unkindly. You stopped asking years ago. His words stripped away my last defenses. In that moment, I finally saw the truth I'd been avoiding. I had become my father. I had treated David exactly as Dad had treated Mom, as an inconvenience, a supporting character, someone whose needs were always secondary to my own importance. It was never about the hug, I whispered, finally understanding. No, David agreed. It was about everything the hug represented: connection, vulnerability, basic human kindness, things that should be given freely in a marriage, not treated as impositions. He slid a folder across the table, divorce papers already prepared. Take your time reviewing these, there's no rush. As he stood to leave, I found myself asking the question that had been haunting me. Were you ever going to tell me? About your mom, your job, the depression, any of it? He paused. I did tell you, Vespera, many times in many ways, you just weren't listening. With that, he walked away, leaving me alone with the wreckage of a marriage I had systematically destroyed. The days that followed passed in a blur. Andrew continued avoiding me at work, eventually admitting awkwardly that he'd been promoted to lead the Henderson account, an account that should have been mine. He'd been using our friendship to gather information and ideas, all while positioning himself as my replacement. When I finally returned to the office after taking some time off, I discovered my position had been quietly downgraded, my most significant accounts reassigned. The empire I'd sacrificed my marriage for was crumbling, revealing how hollow it had been all along. Months later, I ran into them at a farmer's market, David, Olivia, and Diana in a wheelchair. Diana looked frailer but was smiling, pointing out produce while Olivia filled a basket. David stood beside his mother, one hand resting protectively on her shoulder. He saw me before I could retreat. For a moment, I thought he might pretend not to notice me, but instead, he said something to the women and walked over. "Vespera," he said with polite warmth but no lingering attachment. "How are you?" "I'm okay," I said, surprised to find it wasn't entirely a lie. "How's your mom doing?" "Fighting hard," he said, glancing back at Diana with obvious love. "The new treatment is tough, but she's tougher." "And you?" I couldn't help asking. "Are you happy?" He considered the question seriously. "I'm at peace," he finally said. "Working on projects I care about, spending time with people who see me." The implication was clear but not cruel, it was simply truth. "I'm glad," I said and meant it. "You deserve that." As I watched him return to them, I felt a strange mixture of regret and acceptance. I had lost something precious through my own blindness and cruelty. But perhaps the pain of that recognition was the beginning of growth. A chance to become someone different from my father, someone capable of seeing others as whole people rather than supporting characters in my story. The woman who had slammed the door on her husband's request for a hug would always be part of me, but she didn't have to be all of me. That at least was something I could change, not for David, not for any future relationship, but for myself. Because he had been right about the most important thing. It was never about the hug. It was about everything the hug represented. And maybe, just maybe, understanding that was the first step toward becoming someone worthy of the connection I had so carelessly thrown away. In the year after the divorce, I learned what it means to truly be alone. Not the productive solitude I once craved, but the hollow emptiness that comes from realizing you've systematically pushed away everyone who mattered. The apartment that had once felt too small for my ambitions now echoed with absence. I kept expecting to hear David's keys in the door, his humming in the kitchen, the soft padding of his footsteps in the hallway. But there was only silence. I tried to fill that silence with work, but even that betrayed me. The company reorganized, and I found myself with a diminished role, my mentor suddenly unavailable for lunches, and my ambitious plans shelved by new management. Andrew received the promotion I'd been angling for, and rumors circulated about how he had saved the Henderson account from my mismanagement. The whispers in the break room fell silent when I entered. At night, I would lie awake scrolling through old photos. David and I at his cousin's wedding, laughing as we danced. A weekend trip to the mountains where we had stayed up watching stars, sharing dreams. The day we moved into our apartment, both of us exhausted but giddy with the promise of our future together. When had I stopped seeing him as my partner and started viewing him as an obstacle to my advancement? On a particularly low evening, I found myself reaching for my phone, typing out a message to David before catching myself. What would I even say? "Sorry I was too important to hug you when your world was falling apart. Sorry I was too busy chasing validation from colleagues to notice you were drowning." The words seemed pathetically inadequate. Instead, I did something completely out of character. I called my mother. "Vespera," her voice held surprise. "Is everything all right?" When was the last time I had called her just to talk? I couldn't remember. "I messed up, Mom," I said, my voice cracking. "I became Dad." There was a long silence on the other end, then a soft exhale. "Oh, Vespera, I found myself telling her everything: the promotion, Andrew, the way I had dismissed David's feelings the morning of the hug, and finally the divorce. With each confession, I expected judgment, but she just listened. I always knew you were like him, she finally said when I finished. That same drive, that same focus, but I hoped you wouldn't make the same mistakes. I promised myself I wouldn't, I whispered. Your father never saw what he lost until it was gone, she said. At least you can see it, that's something. Does he regret it? I asked. Dad, I mean, my mother laughed softly, sadly. He wouldn't know how, but he's lonely now. All those people he thought were so important, all those meetings he couldn't miss, none of them visit him. None of them call. When he had his heart attack last year, it was me who sat by his bed, not his business partners. I hadn't even known he'd had a heart attack. That's how disconnected I'd become from my own family. How did you stand it, all those years of being second to his work? I made the mistake of thinking he would change, she said simply. That one day he would wake up and realize what mattered. Don't make that mistake with David, Vespera. He's already gone. It was blunt, painful, but necessary. David was gone, not just physically from our apartment, but emotionally from my life. Our therapist, the one I finally started seeing 3 months after the divorce was finalized, called it acceptance. Acceptance didn't mean I stopped thinking about him. I found myself wondering how Diana was doing with her treatments, if David was still freelancing or had found something permanent, if he and Olivia had grown closer. Did she make him breakfast? Did she listen when he spoke? Did she give him the hugs I had been too important to provide? I found some answers through social media. Diana had completed her treatments and was in remission. David had started his own design firm that was already getting attention for innovative work. And yes, there were photos of him with Olivia, not romantic ones, but the easy companionship of two people comfortable with each other. She looked at him the way I used to, before ambition clouded my vision. 6 months after the divorce, I received a job offer from a competitor. Lateral move, not the upward mobility I once craved, but a fresh start. I accepted without hesitation. The night before I was set to start, my phone rang with an unfamiliar number. Vespera, it's Camille. I heard you're leaving the company. My sister, always in the loop somehow. News travels fast, I said. Diana told me. That stopped me. You're in touch with Diana. I visit her sometimes, Camille said matter-of-factly. She reminds me of Grandma. Plus, she makes that lemon cake I like. I felt a pang of something. Jealousy, regret, the idea that my sister maintained a relationship with my ex-mother-in-law while I had barely noticed her cancer diagnosis felt like yet another indictment of who I had become. How is she? I asked carefully. In remission, still tired but fighting. David takes good care of her. I waited for her to mention Olivia, but she didn't. So new job, Camille pivoted. That's good, fresh start. That's the plan. Are you seeing anyone? The question caught me off guard. Dating, you mean? No. Good, she said bluntly. You're not ready. Thanks for the vote of confidence. It's not about confidence, Vess, it's about growth. You need to figure out who you are without hanging your identity on a job title or a relationship. The new job was everything the old one wasn't. Collaborative rather than cutthroat. Focused on impact rather than image. For the first time in years, I found myself engaged with the work itself rather than what the work could do for my status. I started leaving the office at reasonable hours. I joined a community garden. I called my mother weekly. Small steps toward becoming someone different from the woman who had slammed the door on her husband's request for a hug. One evening, nearly a year after the divorce, my phone lit up with a text from an unknown number. Vespera, it's Diana. Would you be willing to meet for coffee? I stared at the message so long my phone went dark. When I finally managed to reply with a simple yes, my hands were shaking. We met at a small cafe near her physical therapy center. She looked better than the last time I'd seen her, still thin but with color in her cheeks and a brightness in her eyes that had been absent during her treatments. Thank you for coming, she said as I sat across from her. I wasn't sure you would. I wasn't sure I should, I admitted. But I'm glad you asked. She studied me with those knowing eyes that had always unnerved me. You look different, calmer. I'm trying to be, I said. Different, I mean, Diana nodded, sipping her tea. I didn't ask you here to talk about David, she said, addressing the elephant in the room. He's doing well, the business is growing, he's happy. I tried to ignore the twist in my stomach. I'm glad. I asked you here because I'm dying. I nearly dropped my coffee. What? But the remission was temporary, she said gently. The cancer's back, more aggressive this time. They've given me 6 months, maybe a year with treatment. Diana, I'm so sorry. And I was, not in the perfunctory way I'd once expressed sympathy while checking my watch, but with genuine aching for this woman I had never really taken the time to know. I don't want your pity, she said firmly. I've had a good life, raised a good son. What I want is to clear the air before I go. She reached into her purse and pulled out a small wrapped package, sliding it across the table. This belonged to David's grandmother. She gave it to me when David was born, told me to pass it on to the woman he married when the time was right. I stared at the package, unable to touch it. I don't understand. Neither did I for the longest time, Diana said. Why I never felt it was the right moment to give it to you. Even at your wedding, something held me back. Now I know why. She pushed the package closer. Open it. With trembling fingers, I unwrapped the tissue paper to reveal a delicate silver locket. Inside was a faded photograph of a young couple, their joy palpable even across the decades. That's David's grandparents on their wedding day, Diana explained. They were married 63 years, not all of them happy. There were hard times, money problems, health scares, a period where they barely spoke to each other. But they found their way back to each other because they never forgot what mattered. Why are you giving me this? Because you'll need it someday. Diana, David and I are divorced. He's moved on. He's happy with Olivia. Diana's brow furrowed in confusion, then understanding dawned. Olivia, David's not with Olivia. She's engaged to her girlfriend. They're getting married in the spring. The revelation shouldn't have mattered. David had every right to move on with or without Olivia. But I felt a lightness I hadn't expected. The locket isn't for you and David, Diana continued. It's for whoever you do end up with when you're ready, when you've learned what my mother-in-law was trying to teach me all those years ago. Which is, that love isn't just a feeling, it's a choice you make every day. 1,000 small moments where you choose the other person over yourself. The mornings you make coffee even when you're tired. The calls you take even when you're busy. The hugs you give even when you're in a rush. I felt tears stinging my eyes. I didn't make those choices. No, she agreed without malice. You didn't, but that doesn't mean you can't learn to. As we said goodbye outside the cafe, Diana hugged me, a gesture that took me by surprise. I forgive you, she whispered. For how you treated my son, now you need to forgive yourself. I watched her walk away, the silver locket heavy in my pocket. Only later did I realize she had paid for both our coffees. 2 weeks after meeting Diana, I received another unexpected text, this time from David. Mom told me you two met. I'd like to talk if you're willing. We arranged to meet at a park halfway between our apartments. It was a crisp fall day, leaves crunching underfoot as I approached the bench where he waited. He looked good, healthy in a way he hadn't during our last months together. His eyes were clear, his shoulders relaxed. No trace remained of the man who had seemed to shrink in the elevator that fateful morning. Thanks for meeting me, he said as I sat beside him. Of course, how are you? Good, busy with the new business, it's going well. I've seen some of your work online, I admitted. It's impressive. A brief smile touched his lips. Thanks. We sat in awkward silence for a moment before both speaking at once. I wanted to, your mother, we both stopped. You first, I said. David took a deep breath. Mom told me about her conversation with you, about the locket. I nodded, unsure where this was going. She shouldn't have done that, he said quietly. Put that kind of expectation on you. It wasn't an expectation, I corrected him. It was a lesson, one I needed to hear. He studied me with new interest. You've changed. I'm trying to, I said honestly. Therapy helps, so does not working 80 hours a week. A faint smile. That would do it. Another silence, less awkward this time. I heard about your mother's diagnosis, I finally said. I'm so sorry, David. Yeah, his voice was tight. It's been tough. The treatments are harder this time. Is there anything I can do? He looked surprised by the offer. Not really, she has good days and bad days. We're making the most of the good ones. Me, my Aunt Laura, some cousins, Olivia when she can. She's busy with wedding planning now though. I heard, Diana mentioned it. David nodded. She's a good friend. One of the few who stuck around through everything. It was my turn to look surprised. I always thought, were you two never romantic? He actually laughed. No, never. She's been with Kate for years. They were just private about it because of Kate's job. I felt a weight lift that I hadn't even realized I was carrying, not because it changed anything between David and me, but because I had been wrong about yet another assumption. I should have asked, I said quietly. Back then, about her. About everything in your life, I should have asked and listened. Yes, he agreed simply. You should have. His honesty was refreshing in its directness. No sugarcoating, no attempt to ease my guilt, just truth. Why did you want to meet David? He seemed to consider his words carefully. Mom doesn't have much time left. There will be a funeral. People will expect you to be there or not be there, and either way, there will be talk. I wanted to clear the air so that's not hanging over us. Of course I'll be there, I said immediately. If that's okay with you. It is, he paused. And I wanted to tell you that I don't hate you, Vespera. I did for a while, but hate takes too much energy to maintain. It was such a David thing to say, pragmatic, honest, without drama. I'm sorry, I said, the words feeling simultaneously massive and inadequate. For all of it, not just the hug, for years of not seeing you. He nodded, accepting the apology without effusive forgiveness. Thank you. As we prepared to leave, an impulse seized me. David, would it be okay if I hugged you, just as friends, as closure? He considered it for a moment, then nodded. We embraced briefly, and I felt none of the electricity that had once charged between us. Just the simple human connection of two people who had once loved each other and now wished each other well. As I watched him walk away, I felt something settle in me. Not happiness exactly, but a kind of peace. The woman who had been too important for a hug was gone. In her place stood someone still flawed, still learning, but finally beginning to understand what truly mattered. That night, I placed Diana's locket in my jewelry box. Not for now, but for someday, when I had learned enough about love to deserve it. Diana passed away on a Tuesday morning in early spring. David called to tell me, his voice calm but weary, explaining the funeral arrangements in the same direct manner he now approached all our interactions. I attended, sitting in the back row, watching as David stood strong beside his Aunt Laura, accepting condolences with quiet dignity. After the service, I waited my turn in the reception line, approaching David with genuine sympathy rather than obligation. She was extraordinary, I said, because it was true. In our few meetings after the divorce, Diana had shown me more authentic kindness than I had offered in years of marriage to her son. She was, David agreed, something softening in his eyes. Thank you for coming, she would have appreciated it. I nodded, prepared to move along, but David surprised me by adding, some of us are gathering at Mom's house later, nothing formal, just family remembering her. You're welcome to join if you'd like. The invitation caught me off guard. Are you sure? She considered you family even after everything, he said simply. And she forgave easily. It was her gift. I went. The gathering was small. David, his Aunt Laura, a few cousins, Olivia and her fiancée Kate, and a handful of Diana's friends. They shared stories about Diana that I had never known, her college activism, her brief career as a jazz singer, her legendary stubbornness. Each anecdote revealed a woman I had never truly seen during the years she was my mother-in-law, someone complex and fascinating beyond her role in relation to me. As the evening wound down, David found me on the back porch, nursing a glass of Diana's favorite wine. Thank you for including me, I said. I learned more about your mother tonight than in all the years we were married. He leaned against the railing, studying the darkening garden. That's because you never asked. It wasn't said cruelly, just matter-of-factly. The old me would have bristled at the perceived accusation. The new me recognized the simple truth of it. No, I didn't, I acknowledged. I was too focused on my own story to be curious about hers. David nodded, accepting my self-awareness without comment. After a moment he said, she left something for you, in her will. For me, my surprise was genuine. Why would she do that? You'd have to ask her, he said with a small smile. But since that's impossible, you'll just have to accept that Diana had her reasons. He handed me a small envelope, my name written in Diana's elegant handwriting. I tucked it into my purse, somehow knowing it wasn't meant to be opened here in front of others. Later that night, alone in my apartment, I carefully opened Diana's final communication. Inside was a simple note card and a small key. Vespera, the note read, there's a storage unit at Harrison Street Storage, 347. The key opens it. What's inside is yours now. Use it wisely. With hope, Diana. The next morning, curiosity pulled me to the address, a nondescript storage facility in a part of town I rarely visited. Unit 347 was small, tucked away in a corner. The key turned smoothly, and I slid the door open to reveal a single item. An antique writing desk, beautiful in its simplicity, with inlaid wood and delicate brass hardware. Attached to the desk was another note in Diana's handwriting. I started writing letters to David's father the day we met. One letter every week for 47 years, even after he was gone. The practice saved my sanity and possibly my marriage. Perhaps it will help you find your way too. I ran my hand over the smooth wood, overwhelmed by the generosity of this gesture. Diana had seen something in me worth salvaging, even when I had failed to see the worth in those around me. That desk became the center of a new ritual. Each evening I would sit and write, sometimes letters to people who would never read them, sometimes reflections on the person I had been and the one I was trying to become. I wrote to David, to Diana, to my father, to the colleagues I had steamrolled in my ambition. I wrote apologies, acknowledgments, and eventually forgiveness for them and for myself. At work, my colleagues noticed the change. The sharp edges that had once defined me softened. I became known for mentoring junior team members rather than competing with peers. When offered a promotion that would have returned me to the grueling schedule of my previous life, I declined in favor of balance. "Are you feeling all right, Lockhart?" my boss had asked, genuinely confused by my decision. "This is what you've been working toward." "I'm feeling better than I have in years," I told him. "And I've realized there are different ways to measure success." A year after Diana's passing, David texted me out of the blue. "Mom's house is finally sold. Clearing out the last items this weekend. Found some photos you might want. No pressure either way." I was surprised by how easily we fell into conversation when I arrived at Diana's now empty house. The awkwardness that had marked our previous interactions had faded, replaced by the comfortable rhythm of two people who knew each other well but no longer sought to change or judge each other. "How's the new firm?" I asked as we sorted through boxes in Diana's study. "Growing faster than expected. Had to hire 2 more designers last month." There was quiet pride in his voice. "How's life at Preston and Ward?" "Surprisingly good. I'm leading a new initiative on ethical marketing practices." He looked up, genuine interest in his eyes. "That sounds exactly nothing like the Vespera I knew." "That's the idea," I said with a small smile. As we worked, David unearthed a photo album I'd never seen before. "This is from our first year together," he said, flipping it open. There we were, younger, carefree, looking at each other with unguarded affection. Me laughing as David attempted to cook something elaborate, him asleep with his head in my lap as I read, both of us painting our first apartment. "I barely remember being her," I said softly, studying my younger self. "So present, so connected." "You were," David confirmed. "Before the promotions and the 60-hour weeks. Before you decided that success meant outperforming everyone at the cost of everything." There was no bitterness in his assessment, just observation. We had moved beyond blame to understanding. "Do you ever wonder," I asked carefully, "what would have happened if I hadn't changed, if we had stayed those people?" David considered the question seriously, as he did most things. "Sometimes, but that's not how life works. We all change. The question is whether we grow together or grow apart." "We grew apart," I acknowledged. "We did." He closed the album gently. "But maybe we both needed to grow separately for a while." The implication hung in the air between us, unacknowledged but undeniable. Not reconciliation, but the possibility of a new beginning someday, not as the people we had been, but as the people we were becoming. That evening, as I prepared to leave with the photos and a few mementos Diana had wanted me to have, David walked me to my car. "I have something else for you," he said, handing me a small box. I found it while clearing out Mom's jewelry box. Inside was a delicate charm bracelet with a single charm, a silver door. She bought it after you two had coffee that last time, David explained. Said she was going to give it to you for your birthday with a charm for new beginnings. The door that closes is also the one that opens, or something cryptic like that. I smiled, remembering Diana's philosophical side. She always did have a flair for meaningful gestures. As David helped clasp the bracelet around my wrist, our fingers brushed. For a moment, I thought I felt a familiar spark, but I couldn't be sure if it was memory or possibility. Thank you for today, I said. For sharing these memories with me even after everything. That's what forgiveness looks like, he replied. Not forgetting, but remembering without pain. I drove home with Diana's bracelet on my wrist and her wisdom in my heart, wondering if there might yet be another chapter in the story I had once so carelessly discarded. The invitation came 6 months later. David's firm was hosting a gallery showing of their latest design projects. No pressure, his text read, but if you're free, it would be nice to see a friendly face among the critics. The gallery was crowded with industry professionals, most of whom I didn't recognize. David stood in the center of a group, explaining the concept behind a particularly striking design. He seemed completely in his element, confident but not arrogant, passionate without being overbearing. I hung back, not wanting to interrupt, content to observe this version of him that had flourished in my absence. He spotted me eventually, excusing himself from the group to make his way toward me. You came, he said, genuine pleasure in his voice. I said I would. I gestured around the room. This is incredible, David. You've built something remarkable here. We have, he corrected, introducing me to his business partner Chen, a quiet woman with intelligent eyes who clearly respected David immensely. Vespera used to be in marketing, David explained to Chen. She has an eye for what resonates with consumers. The simple acknowledgement of my professional value without reference to our past struck me as deeply generous. As the evening progressed, I found myself drawn into conversations about David's projects, offering perspectives that were actually received with interest rather than dismissed. Your insight about the accessibility features is spot on, Chen told me later. We've been so focused on the aesthetic we nearly missed the practical. Ves always had a knack for seeing what others missed, David said, then caught himself. Professionally, I mean. The irony wasn't lost on either of us. I had been perceptive about market trends and consumer psychology, but blind to the emotional needs of the man I had married. As the event wound down, David asked if I'd like to grab coffee. We found an all-night diner a few blocks away, sliding into a booth with the easy familiarity of people who had shared thousands of meals together. Thank you for including me tonight, I said after we'd ordered. It meant a lot. I'm glad you came. Your feedback was valuable. Just the feedback. I asked bolder than I intended. David studied me for a long moment. What are you asking, Ves? The nickname, casual and intimate, gave me courage. I'm asking if there might be a place for me in your life again, not necessarily romantically, I added quickly, just in some capacity. He didn't answer immediately, stirring his coffee with methodical precision. There was a time when I would have given anything to hear you say that. And now I'm cautious, he said honestly. We hurt each other badly, Ves. You with your ambition and dismissal, me with my silence and withdrawal. We did, I acknowledged. But we're different people now. Are we, or are we just the same people who have learned some hard lessons? It was a fair question, one I had asked myself many times in the months since Diana's death. I can't speak for you, I said carefully. But I know I've changed. The woman who couldn't spare time for a hug doesn't exist anymore. Work is still important to me, but it's not everything. I've learned to see people, really see them as more than supporting characters in my story. David nodded, accepting my self-assessment without judgment. I've changed too. Learned to speak up instead of withdrawing, learned that martyrdom isn't noble, it's just another form of control. We sat with that shared understanding, neither of us rushing to fill the silence. So where does that leave us? I finally asked. I don't know, he admitted. But I think maybe we start small. Coffee sometimes. Conversations that don't revolve around Diana or the past. See who we are to each other now. It wasn't a grand reunion or a passionate declaration, but it felt right, measured, mindful, mature. The foundation for something that might actually last. I'd like that, I said simply. As we prepared to leave, I noticed David hesitate, clearly debating something internally. What is it? I asked. Would it be all right if I hugged you? He asked, a faint echo of vulnerability in his voice. As friends, as a new beginning. The parallels to that morning years ago weren't lost on either of us. But this time, instead of dismissal, I opened my arms without hesitation. I would love that, I said. The embrace was brief but genuine, not the automatic peck-and squeeze of our later married years, nor the passionate clinches of our early relationship. Just two people choosing connection over distance, however momentarily. As we parted outside the diner, David touched the charm bracelet on my wrist. Mom was right, about doors closing and opening. She usually was, I agreed. About most things. Walk you to your car? I'd like that. We strolled in companionable silence through the quiet streets, our pace unhurried, both of us seemingly aware that we stood at a crossroads, not just with each other, but with the people we had been and the ones we were becoming. At my car, David hesitated again. This isn't a promise, he said carefully. Just a possibility. I need you to understand that. I do, I assured him. Possibilities are enough for now. As I drove home, Diana's silver door charm caught the streetlights, glinting with potential. The woman who had once been too important for a hug now understood its value, not just as a gesture of affection, but as an acknowledgement of shared humanity, of vulnerability embraced rather than rejected. That night, I sat at Diana's writing desk and penned a letter I would never send, addressed to the woman I had been on that fateful morning years ago. The hug you refused held more significance than you could possibly understand. But perhaps, if you're lucky and patient and willing to grow, you might someday be worthy of another one. Our coffee meetings became a monthly routine, then weekly. Neutral territory at first, public cafes where we sat across from each other, carefully navigating conversations about work, mutual friends, current events. Gradually, the distance between us narrowed. I found myself laughing at David's dry observations, remembering how his particular brand of humor had once been the highlight of my days. Remember when we first moved into the apartment and the upstairs neighbor played cello at midnight? He asked one afternoon, stirring his tea methodically. And you left a note asking if they took requests. I smiled at the memory. They actually showed up at our door with sheet music. Mrs. Abernathy, David nodded. She played at our wedding. The mention of our wedding might once have created an awkward pause, but now it simply existed as a shared history, neither romanticized nor avoided. I saw her last month, actually, David continued. She's teaching music at the community center now. Asked about you. What did you tell her? That you were doing well, that we talk sometimes. He glanced up. Was that okay? The care in the question touched me. Once David would have assumed what I wanted. Now he asked, treating my preferences as distinct from his own. More than okay, I assured him. As summer faded into fall, our meetings extended beyond coffee. A documentary screening David thought I might enjoy. An ethical marketing panel where I saved him a seat. Small, careful steps toward a friendship that acknowledged our past without being defined by it. Then came the Saturday morning David called, his voice tight with controlled panic. The pipe burst in my office, everything soaked. I have client presentations due Monday and my computer's backup failed. I'll be right over, I said without hesitation. His office was a disaster, water-damaged files, soggy furniture, the distinctive smell of wet drywall. David stood in the middle of it all, looking more defeated than I'd seen him since our divorce. What do you need? I asked, already rolling up my sleeves. Time machine, he said with a weak smile. Barring that, someone who remembers how my brain works. We spent the weekend recreating his presentations. I ordered food, made coffee, and helped him reconstruct his thought process while he designed. By Sunday evening, we had salvaged what seemed unsalvageable. We did it, David said, leaning back in his chair with exhaustion and relief. We did, I agreed, suddenly aware of how easily we had fallen back into collaboration, how the rhythm of working together had returned without effort. Thank you, he said, looking at me with genuine gratitude. Not just for this weekend, but for coming immediately, for not asking questions or telling me I should have had better backups. You would have done the same for me, I said simply. It was true, I realized. Even at my worst, when I had treated him as an inconvenience rather than a partner, David would have dropped everything to help me. The difference was that now I understood the value of that loyalty, the rarity of having someone who showed up without conditions. As I prepared to leave, David walked me to the door. I have a work event next weekend, he said hesitantly. A dinner with potential investors. Would you consider coming with me? The invitation hung in the air between us, weighted with significance beyond a simple dinner. As your business consultant, I asked, wanting clarity. As my friend, he said. As someone whose insight I value as whatever we are to each other now. I accepted, and that dinner led to others, professional events where we presented as colleagues, then casual meals where we were simply David and Vespera, two people enjoying each other's company. We developed new patterns, different from our married rhythms but comfortable in their own way. You never ask about work first anymore, David observed one evening as we walked through the park after dinner. You used to lead with that, checking on deals and clients before asking about anything else. I hadn't noticed the change but recognized its truth immediately. I think I finally understand that work is what we do, not who we are. He nodded thoughtfully. Makes me wonder what else has changed that we haven't noticed. The question lingered between us, an invitation to deeper reflection. Later that night, I sat at Diana's writing desk, penning thoughts about transformation, about how change happens in such small increments that you only recognize it in retrospect. The woman who couldn't spare time for a hug has learned to pause, I wrote. The man who withdrew rather than speak his truth has learned to assert his needs. We are not who we were. But are we ready to be something new to each other? A text arrived as I finished writing. Thank you for tonight. It matters that you listen now. Sleep well. Such a simple message, yet it made my breath catch. David had noticed the change in me, not just the outer behaviors but the inner shift. I was finally becoming someone capable of real connection, someone who understood that true intimacy requires presence. Winter arrived with unexpected opportunities. My company downsized, eliminating my position in a corporate restructuring that once would have devastated me. Instead, I found myself relieved, even excited by the possibilities that opened up. I'm thinking of going independent, I told David over hot chocolate at our favorite cafe. Consulting on ethical marketing practices, helping companies align profit with purpose. You'd be brilliant at that, he said without hesitation. Actually, I know several firms that could use exactly that perspective. Are you offering to be my first client? I teased. Business partner maybe, he suggested, then quickly added, professionally speaking, of course. The clarification was unnecessary but telling. We were both still cautious, careful not to presume or pressure. Yet something was shifting between us, a warming of the careful distance we had maintained. The holidays approached, and with them, the first anniversary of Diana's passing. I found David at the cemetery on a cold December morning, standing before his mother's headstone with flowers in hand. I thought I might find you here, I said softly, placing my own bouquet beside his. She would have appreciated the company, he replied, his voice rough with emotion. She always said graves were too lonely. We stood together in the winter silence, breath clouding in the cold air. I miss her wisdom, I admitted. She saw things so clearly. She saw you clearly, David said. Even when I couldn't anymore, even when all I could see was what we'd lost. The words settled between us, heavy with implication. And what do you see now? I asked, my heart beating faster. David turned to face me fully. I see someone who has worked harder on herself than anyone I know. Someone who doesn't just apologize but actually changes. Someone who listens now, who shows up, who gives without calculating what she'll get in return. His honesty humbled me. I see someone who found the courage to set boundaries, to walk away from harm even when it broke his heart. Someone who learned to speak his truth instead of silently suffering. Someone who forgives not out of weakness but out of strength. The cemetery was quiet around us, a peaceful backdrop to this moment of reckoning. I'm not suggesting we pick up where we left off, David said carefully. That relationship is gone, but I've been wondering lately if we might start something new. Something built on who we are now, not who we were then. The possibility both thrilled and terrified me. What would that look like? Honestly, I don't know, he admitted. But I think it starts with being completely transparent about what we need and want. No assumptions, no mind reading. I nodded, recognizing the wisdom in his approach. I want someone who sees me as a whole person, not just a career or a role, and I want to be someone who sees others the same way. I want someone who speaks up instead of shutting down, David added. And I want to be someone who listens when they do. We stood there in the cold, two people who had hurt each other deeply now cautiously offering new versions of themselves to each other. So where do we start? I finally asked. David smiled, a genuine warmth reaching his eyes. Would it be too on the nose to suggest a hug? The call back to our breaking point could have been painful, but instead it felt like reclamation, taking a moment of disconnection and transforming it into reconnection. I opened my arms without hesitation. I would love nothing more. This embrace was different from our friendly hugs of recent months. We held each other fully, completely present, neither rushing nor retreating. I felt David's heartbeat against mine, steady and strong. When we finally stepped apart, something had shifted irrevocably. Have dinner with me tonight, he said. Not as friends or colleagues or exes working through the past, just as us whoever we are now. That night changed everything and nothing. We talked more openly than we had in years, perhaps ever, about our fears and hopes. About the lessons we'd learned from our collapse, about what we might build together if we were brave enough to try again. I'm scared, I admitted over dessert. Scared that we'll slip back into old patterns. That I'll become that ambitious, disconnected woman again. I'm scared too, David said. That I'll stop communicating when things get hard, that I'll expect you to read my mind instead of stating my needs. So how do we prevent that? He considered the question seriously. We stay conscious. We call each other out when we see the old patterns emerging. We remember that relationships aren't static, they require constant tending. Like Diana's letters, I said, thinking of her weekly ritual of connection. Consistent, intentional communication even when it's difficult. As the evening ended, David walked me to my car. The air between us crackled with possibility, with questions unasked and answers not yet given. I'd like to kiss you good night, he said simply. If that's something you want to. The directness of the request, so different from the presumptions of our married life or the careful distance of our post-divorce interactions, moved me deeply. I would like that very much, I replied. The kiss was gentle, tentative, neither clinging to the past nor rushing toward the future. Just two people choosing connection, choosing each other in this present moment. Spring arrived with new beginnings. My consulting business flourished, built on principles of ethical marketing and authentic communication. David's firm expanded, adding new designers and larger projects. We carved out time for each other despite busy schedules, prioritizing connection in ways we hadn't during our marriage. Move in with me, David suggested one evening as we walked along the river. Not to my place or yours. Let's find somewhere new, start fresh. The old me would have hesitated, citing work commitments or independence concerns. The new me recognized the gift being offered, a chance to build something intentional, something better. Yes, I said simply. Let's build a home together. We found a light-filled apartment with space for both Diana's writing desk and David's design studio. As we unpacked, blending our separate lives into a shared one, I came across the silver locket Diana had given me years before. Look what I found, I said, showing it to David. He took it carefully, opening it to reveal his grandparents' wedding photo. They went through their own dark period, you know. Grandpa told me once they nearly divorced when he came back from the war. What changed? They learned to see each other again, he said. To recognize that the person you love will evolve over time and your love has to evolve with them. I thought of how far we had come, from the morning I had refused a simple hug to this moment of conscious reconnection. Will you put it on me? I asked, turning so he could fasten the locket around my neck. As his fingers brushed my skin, I felt Diana's presence somehow. Not mystical or supernatural, but present in the wisdom she had passed to us, in the forgiveness she had modeled, in the belief she had maintained that people could change if they truly wanted to. Later that night, as we prepared for bed in our new home, David paused at the doorway to our bedroom. "Vess," he said softly, "could I get a hug before we sleep?" The parallel to that fateful morning was unmistakable, but this time I saw the request for what it truly was. Not neediness or childishness, but a simple human desire for connection. A reminder that no matter how important our work or how pressing our deadlines, nothing matters more than the moments we choose to be fully present with each other. I crossed the room without hesitation, wrapping my arms around him completely. "Always," I promised. "Any time you ask, and even when you don't." As we held each other in the quiet of our new beginning, I understood finally what Diana had tried to teach me. Love isn't grand gestures or perfect understanding. It's showing up. It's seeing the other person as they truly are. It's never being too busy or too important for moments of human connection. The woman who had slammed the door on her husband's request for a hug would always be part of me. A reminder of what happens when we prioritize achievement over connection, when we view others as supporting characters rather than full humans with their own complex inner lives. But she wasn't all of me anymore. She didn't dictate my choices or define my future. In her place stood someone who understood, finally and fully, that it was never about the hug. It was about everything the hug represented. Vulnerability embraced rather than rejected, presence chosen over distraction, love expressed in the smallest of gestures. David's arms tightened around me briefly before we stepped apart, smiling at each other with the quiet knowledge of people who have walked through fire and emerged transformed. "Welcome home," he said softly, and I was.